So welcome everyone to this EU Green Week partner event. Today we're going to have 4 presentations that are related to pay for performance. This is organized through the SENSEI project. You've seen, of course, that the title is matching the ambitious EU energy efficiency goals with profitable business models. And in our program today, we will first go a little bit into an introduction to SENSEI, the business of energy efficiency. We also see by Matt Golden how this is done in the US, and we will also have a quick Q&A session right after the presentation. Then we will have Johan Kuhlen presenting the SENSEI business model, and then we were proceeding with Monica Pascual, where we're looking at a potential practical implementation of pay-for-performance schemes in the EU. Lastly, we have saved quite some time, and hence the reason this is a rather open event for questions, answers, a lively debate. So we have about 20 minutes for that. As participants, you can always type in your question, and we will preferably keep these questions for the end, unless there's something quick we can ask in between presentations. And of course, we invite your participation in this. If you also wish to speak, you could unmute your mic, but please raise your hand first so that we can give the floor. So we will start with the first presentation now. Share. I guess this doesn't work. Give me a moment. Good. So, as I explained briefly, this is our schedule for the ones that are joined right now. And let's get started with the first presentation. So, my name is Philippos Anagnostopoulos. I'm a senior associate at ICP, and my expertise is mainly on the formulation, implementation, evaluation of EU energy policies, mainly on energy efficiency and on the building sector. So very briefly, as many of you might know, buildings account for about 40% of the EU's final energy consumption, and hence any energy efficiency measures offer multiple benefits in terms of energy savings, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, creating growth, employment, reducing food poverty, having more comfortable, healthy buildings, and so on and so forth. To do those and having this potential, we do have some shortcomings. There is a lack of investment in specific segments. Of course, not everything can be covered by subsidies, and we also need more private sector involvement. In this context, we have energy performance contracting that has worked quite successfully in some markets in the EU, but mostly targets single and large projects, mostly municipalities, schools, hospitals, and so on. We also have public energy efficiency programs to promote renovations and to capture all these multiple benefits. But these usually rely on either upfront subsidies or tax rebates, and the monitoring of the effectiveness of these programs is not always done in a very accurate way. So energy savings are deemed, and they are linked to the installation of specific measures. So payments, subsidies, for example, for these activities are made based on what is installed and not by measuring on how much energy was actually saved. And also when trying to bring in the private sector and, let's say, financial institutions, we need to have certain parameters such as very low administrative costs, very low transaction costs, And these investments need to be quite large, usually over 5 million or over 50 million occasionally, in order to be accepted by these financial institutions. Now, what we have been trying to do in SENSEI is to investigate the use of these pay-for-performance schemes, and I read to be, first of all, aggregating retrofit projects, to also be improving the effectiveness of subsidy programs, and to also see how we can use energy efficiency as an energy resource and as a service to the grid. Pay for performance is also something that has gained quite some traction with the European institutions. So the European Commission, in its renovation wave in the August of 2020, said that member states can scale up market incentives, such as pay for performance schemes, and also very recently reiterated this commitment in its EU Safe Energy communication, where it said that it will examine additional measures to trigger further private investments, for example, through pay-for-performance schemes. For those that are not yet aware, what are pay-for-performance schemes? It's essentially an innovative approach to finance energy efficiency projects. So it allows to aggregate individual projects into portfolios, and this can help attract investments for private funds that want to invest in bigger projects and have an improved risk management strategy. Pay for performance can also be used to improve subsidy schemes. So energy efficiency payments are not made based on deep savings, and instead can be replaced by periodic payments that are proportional to measured energy savings. And these measured savings are estimated with advanced measurement and verification techniques. And it's also very useful to recognize energy efficiency as a demand-side energy resource and quantify its benefits for the energy system, for example, generating cash flow from benefited parties, such as transmission system operators. Now, the SENSEI project has been largely inspired by the experience in the US. Pay-for-performance pilots and programs have been taking place for about 10 years now, and experience have been building for many more years before that. So we interviewed a few program managers to understand what are the main benefits of the approach. An important one is the non-wires alternatives, which is the use of energy efficiency as a demand-side grid infrastructure. And this is used to avoid the need of technical upgrades, extending the network in order to correct for congestion. Another one that we see is the use of efficiency as a demand-side energy resource, and this makes it possible to participate in capacity auctions and offering a specific reduction of demand for specific time periods and locations. And third, we see that it's possible to use energy efficiency, pay-for-performance schemes to optimize energy efficiency programs. And there we see that the measures to be implemented can be directed to the sectors and to the customers where deeper savings are economically possible. All of this is made possible by advancements in measurement and verification. I believe Matt might have a word or two more on that. Essentially, advanced MNV or MNV 2.0 has been called a few times. It offers more accuracy, reliability, and transparency. The way it works is by modeling the behavior of a building and then having this projected baseline of consumption compared with the reduced energy consumption after energy efficiency measures have been installed. Now, there are quite a few techniques and protocols that help do that. A very famous one is Caltrack. IPMVP also foresees advanced measurement and verification, and the SENSEI project has also developed a toolkit to contribute to this effort called Insight. Now, moving on to what the SENSEI project would like to propose, and Johan will elaborate on this a bit further later on. We have a model for how pay-for-performance schemes could work in the EU. So I'll just spend 2 minutes on that. And On the left-hand side, we see the finance providers, and on the right-hand side, we see the system for exploiting energy efficiency potentials. The blue arrows you see on the scheme are upfront investments. Orange arrows are periodic payments that are based on metered savings, and green data are data flows. Now, in this scheme, the energy efficiency aggregator is central, as it is the entity that is bundling individual energy projects into portfolios. It links those portfolios to ESCOs. It secures financing through entities that want to finance efficiency projects. So financial flows are coming from either public authorities that are subsidizing energy efficiency programs, system operators such as transmission system operators, distribution system operators that are interested in using demand-side resources for the grid, and financial institutions that expect long-term returns on their investment. And in the right-hand side, you see how financial flows are channeled to energy service companies that have the technical expertise to implement the appropriate energy efficiency measures in specific buildings. And then you see how savings are estimated using advanced monitoring and verification techniques. And then periodic tables across the system are based on performance of these measures. Based on the work that we have done, we see that a program like this is very unlikely to emerge on its own and bottom up. It requires an enabling energy market and enabling legal framework that has to be set in place by a top-down authority, so the market facilitator that you see in this graph. So this entity has the objective of facilitating the creation of these programs. It has to analyze market conditions, propose adaptations to the regulatory and market framework, define minimum standards, enable rules, and the right infrastructure needs to also be set in place. Now, there are a number of benefits in this process, both for public energy efficiency funds that essentially can finally have some certainty over the effectiveness of their subsidies. Power system operators can also use these dynamic monitoring and verification techniques to evaluate the effect of demand-side measures. And financial institutions have the possibility to invest in large and aggregated portfolios of efficiency projects. This is a theoretical scheme, and it really is only one of several options that can emerge when building a pay-for-performance program. We find that the specifications for each pay-for-performance program that can be built under this general framework will have to be decided in consultation with involved stakeholders, and they will also need to be adjusted to the local or national market conditions where it will be carried out. This is now an example of how energy efficiency could be used as a demand-side resource, where power system operators can procure, can tender for reduction of energy demand. Aggregators can win this contract, facilitate the flow of financing through ESCOs that, again, renovate buildings. The savings from buildings are measured, and based on these actual savings, the financial flows can then continue, where power system operators can pay the aggregator based on the energy that was saved. Financial institutions also have access to the data, can be paid from that, and so on. I will not spend too much time on it because we need to be moving ahead. I will only finish by saying that we see that for setting up a performance scheme, we need 5 rather concrete steps. The first of all is to realize that energy efficiency has a value as an energy source and secure high-level commitments, for example, from TSOs, DSOs, regulators, to pilot energy efficiency programs that are based on pay-for-performance and on meter savings. Second is the facilitation, where a competent managing authority, for example, an energy agency, can oversee the design of such a scheme and pilots. We have advanced monitoring and verification, where we need to adopt or develop a methodology such as CalTrack to increase accuracy and transparency of energy savings. Procurement is extremely important, where tenders can be issued for energy efficiency projects that use pay for performance and metered savings. And perhaps here we could also foresee, at least in the initial phases, some favorable conditions, perhaps through guarantees. And lastly, we need to evaluate what has happened, build know-how, capacity building, and repeat with new pilots. So this was a brief presentation of the SENSEI project, where it stands, or a few things it has achieved so far. I would like to thank you. Please get in contact with us or visit the website if you have more questions on this. And now we can move on to the next presentation by Matt. I will stop presenting for the moment. And well, perhaps before continuing, I should mention that Matt Colden is the founder and CEO of Recurve. It's a company that has done quite some innovative activities in this field, and it's one from which we have been very much inspired and would like to follow the example and the experience that has already happened in the US. So Matt, the floor is yours.
All right, can you guys just confirm, see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Cool, so I'm gonna give a little bit of history of why at least Recurve and why we believe pay for performance is an important forward step for the demand side. I would preface that I think there's absolutely nothing innovative about what we're talking about. Energy efficiency, as you know, from a programmatic standpoint, in the US anyways, really isn't scaling anymore. You know, ratepayer funds that have historically paid for it are being reduced, not increased. And the problems we're having on the grid have nothing necessarily to do with saving energy. It's about shifting and moving energy into the periods of time where we're seeing large scale renewables. And I would just focus on the fact that paying for outcomes, you know, as a methodology is really how pretty much the entire economy works. And so, you know, as we talk about, you know, the innovation around P4P, I would just stress that it's actually trying to take a playbook out of almost every other part of the economy and applying those ideas to the demand side. And, you know, paying rebates for equipment, whether it works or not, is actually a unique attribute of energy efficiency. And I don't say that favorably. Whereas this is really kind of a traditional, a very, very regular, normalized approach that you'll see across most every sector in both the US and the EU. So first and foremost, why does efficiency matter? You know, why do we care about reducing demand? You know, fundamentally, the grid is changing. You know, we're moving from traditional, you know, reliable fossil fuels to distributed renewables, which are clean, but also not as easily dispatched. And so in this world, you know, that's shifting from a nice centralized grid where you could have a network operating control system and, you know, a centralized authority making decisions. It's becoming much more distributed and complicated. We're talking about thermostats in people's homes, plug bricks on all sorts of equipment, how you charge your car, what temperature you set your heat pump. It's gotten very complex. It doesn't lend itself to centralization anymore. In fact, you know, I would say when you look at the skill sets of various utilities, this is really far down on the list of what, you know, a centralized authority can actually manage when it comes to flexibility that happens behind the meter in buildings from thousands and thousands, frankly, millions, potentially billions of devices. So what we see as we decarbonize the grid across the board are all sorts of very expensive load shapes emerging. So, you know, this is from various conditions, whether it's, you know, wind or solar, you know, nuclear baseload, other things we see, you know, there's not a lot of consistency, but these kind of challenges are really expensive for the grid, for grid operators and utilities, and also, you know, result in periods of time where, you know, at some times in the day, you know, we're dealing with with electrons that are clean and virtually free, and actually we don't know where to put them. Other times of the day, we're back running fossil fuels. So this is an example of the duck curve in California, which is a result of our really high levels of penetration of solar primarily. And you can see that over time, we're experiencing a lower and lower, what's called belly of the duck, which means in the middle of the day, we're actually over generating solar. to such a degree that we don't know what to do with it. And in fact, we're paying states in the US, like Arizona, we're paying them in California to take California solar electrons off of our grid. And then in the evening, we experience this ramp and we're back on fossil fuels. And in fact, the California peak is now 8 and 9 p.m., trending towards 9 and 10 p.m. in the evening as storage comes online. So using electrons down here actually saves everybody money and has no GHG impact. Using electrons up here is terribly expensive and GHG burdensome. And this is after we've curtailed 20% of our solar on the grid already. And so this is the future we're moving into. And that's why when I said at the beginning, saving energy in kilowatt hours really isn't the game. It's about using, in fact, as we electrify buildings and electrify transportation, we're looking at potentially 3 times more generation in the US than we currently have online as it stands. So we actually, when trying to build load, we just need to do so in the periods of time where it's plentiful and we don't know what to do with it, and reduce load during those peaks. So it's a different game. And we can't just get there with production. Like I said, if we are successful in electrifying buildings and transportation, we need 3 times more generation on the grid than we currently have. And that's just not going to happen. We're decommissioning generation faster than we're bringing online. So what we're focused on here today, and what we think of as why pay for performance needs to exist, is to make energy efficiency and what we think of as demand flexibility, which is how you predictably load shape over time and respond to grid events. That's EE and DR. And you do that in a consistent way that focuses on outcomes and encourages the thousands and really endless numbers of innovative technologies that are out there. Stop picking winners, send a price signal and let the market function. But we have to bring the demand side aligned with the supply side. So the game is using energy and getting when it is cheap and free and clean, and using less of it when it's dirty and expensive. So some examples of that: this is the California grid in 2020 when we had a 5-day heat wave that resulted in blackouts. And just to give you a sense of the demand side taking action, this is looking at a demand response event during that period. So it's 105 degrees if you look at the dashed line. And this is a portfolio, in this case, of residential customers in Southern California responding to this grid event. That's the red is actually the what we call flex meter baseline. This is an event driven. Rather, again, we don't really differentiate between energy efficiency and demand response. We think you have to do both. And this was the effect of these customers reducing load during this peak period, and you can see that quantified down below. And this is some analysis that we were doing for the California Independent Systems Operator. But that's not the only thing we're seeing. This is for this summer in the US, we're seeing potentially elevated to extremely high grid problems occurring across pretty much the entire western half of the US grids. We have multiple grids in the United States. So this is not an isolated event, and the grid's becoming more and more volatile and costly to operate, as we onboard more renewables and can head towards a decarbonized grid. Right now, over 70% of Americans buy power from a utility that have a GHG goal. And increasingly in places like California, that's 0 GHGs by 2045. So we have stuff like the near blackouts we had 3 weeks ago in the Texas grid. This is May, we're already having near blackouts. Of course, the central MISO, the central part of the US, which frankly wasn't on many of our radars, is the most critical part of the entire country now from a grid reliability standpoint. And here in California, we're forecasting a 3.5 actually to 4.4 gigawatt summer reliability emergency, which is a shortfall during the summer peak. And so just to frame that, 4.4 gigawatts, we have the big nuclear reactor that we have left in California called Diablo is 2.2 gigawatts. So this is 2 nuclear power plants worth of shortfall. And so we're doing everything we can to respond to the governor's emergency, including, by the way, paying diesel generators to spin during peak right now, because reliability is king. Everything comes after that. You got to keep the lights on before you can decarbonize. And so responding to this emergency, the Public Utilities Commission worked with stakeholders, including Recurve. We had proposed an expansion of what we call FLEXmarket. FLEXmarket is what sometimes we call P for P 2.0. This is the much more market-based version of pay for performance. We ran pay for performance like a government scheme for years, where we would have governing authority run RFPs, select vendors, have a lot of utility-centric rules. They didn't work. They didn't scale. There were too many barriers. The companies that were largest in the market wouldn't turn out because it was frankly too risky for them. The regulatory risk was off the hook. So FLEXmarket is really just taking the P for P concept and making it much more market-based and reducing the barriers to entry. And I'm not sure I would agree necessarily that you need a big government oversight committee to run a pay for performance program. To me, this is frankly in the economic interest of market actors. We need to make sure that they can get compensated, but it's a much simpler scheme. You focus on value and get out of the way. There's a lot less rules that need to be figured out. So in this approach, we're focused on working with aggregators, and I'll show you what some of those look like. We don't run RFPs. Folks sign what's called a flexibility purchase agreement, which is a hunting license to get paid for what they produce and what it's worth to the grid. Those aggregators go out and get customers any way they want. This includes companies doing energy service agreements, but also lighting contractors and grow rooms and car charging and refrigeration systems. It's a huge list, and we stay out of the business model really entirely, how the customer buys and what they choose to buy. Our focus is then looking at those customers individually, but how they perform over a portfolio is the virtual power plant, which is what we think of energy efficiency in a bucket. And we focus on what was the impact to demand, both predictably, energy efficiency, what do you do every day, and also when there are events, dispatchable, DR, and measuring those impacts and quantifying the value. So we use something in California called the avoided cost curve, which is the GHG, T&D, ancillary services value in each hour of the day, forecasted out 40 years. And we pay those aggregators for the grid value that they're contributing. And so we leave the customers to pay for their end of the deal, the comfort, the reduced bills, and the utility who's receiving the benefit of the T&D impacts or the reduced capacity or their hedge on market exposure during peaks. Those mutual benefits, that virtual power plant is paid by the utility to the aggregator based on performance. And our goal in this approach is to remove the barriers. And that's how we get participation. We make it really easy. And so the focus from a regulatory standpoint and a utility standpoint is what's it worth? And once it's worth, you kind of can get out of the way, let the market sort out how to get there. So in California, again, I mentioned 4 to 9 is in the summer is the real problem hours on the grid. That's where most of the GHGs and grid value are. Other hours of the day, in many cases, we want to increase consumption. And the hours of 8 and 9, that's net peak. Those are the most important, valuable hours when we're running dirty fossil fuels. And it's terribly expensive. That, again, is shifting later in the day. We, again, expect to see 9 and 10 p.m. system peaks in the coming years. So this is an example of the price signal. This is for a 15-year HVAC measure. So we pay based on what the performance is in the first year. We're measuring and paying out quarterly. And if you install a behavioral measure, you get what's called a 1-year useful life. But if you install something like an HVAC system, we'll actually pay the discounted net present value of a 15-year life of that HVAC system in year 1. And so this is some idea of what that remuneration looks like. So you can reduce energy in any hour you want. You'll get paid that value for that 15-year life. You can also just shift. You can pre-cool, catch back up on the other side. There'll be a debit in the hours you increase and a credit in the hours you decrease, but there's arbitrage between the two. And so these values vary a little bit on the measure, the lifespan of that measure. And again, it can range from everything from controlling existing thermostats where you get paid for a 1-year useful life to things like HVAC that are infrastructure that will last for a considerable period of time. This is an example of some of the aggregators that are part of the system. And again, we're not running RFPs. We actually our goal is to roll out the red carpet to the businesses that are out there doing the work. And frankly, like in the EU, there is a multi-billion-dollar business servicing buildings that affect energy. And that's ought to be our goal. It's great to attract the newfound cool companies inventing new tech, but how do we bring the large-scale companies, the Siemens, the Honeywells, the NRESCOs, the ICFs, the folks who control huge load and are out there building projects every day and get them onto the platform with the lowest risk possible. And again, we do that through, you could call it an RFQ, but if you have the qualifications and you sign the contract, you're on. And our goal is to make, again, this as easy and inviting and low risk to these companies as possible, because this is the most important part of the success. If the market actually responds to the signal, we're going to see real acceleration. And we have to do that by reducing the regulatory risk and complexity, because that's really the biggest barrier. Most of the best companies in the market have experienced that utility programs eat your lunch and lose you money. And we have to overcome that. And that's kind of step 1, is deprogramming. This is not another utility scheme, top-down, rule-based approach. This is a market. We're paying for outcomes. You figure out how to get there, and we'll stay out of your hair. And that's a great trade for taking on the performance risk. So these are some of the examples. We're doing this in a number of states across the US in different forms, but in California, we're starting to get a pretty significant footprint. We're running a commercial market access FLEXmarket with PG&E across most of Northern California, but we also have a number of additional markets opening up with community choice aggregators, which are local nonprofit retailers, and also regional energy networks, which are local governments. And some of these are focused on other goods too. For example, the 3C REN is focused on paying for outcomes, and it's designed for electrification. So we're increasing the value of natural gas reductions, which encourages heat pumps when you do that. And we're paying 7 times as much for natural gas reductions for hard to reach or low income equity customers, which means if you install a heat pump on a low income customer, the grid value plus this additional kicker for gas reduction, when you install a heat pump that actually works on customers that need one, for example, you have an air conditioner to start with, it'll essentially be a direct install program for those customers, but it has to actually work. And that's an important part of this. You can't just get paid for throwing equipment and walking away, especially something like a heat pump, because especially with low-income customers with California electric rates, most customers will have their bills go up. And in many cases, if you're, for example, putting in a heat pump that adds an air conditioner, it's environmentally and grid upside down the entire time because you're building summer load. So we need to have that performance-based alignment to make sure that the heat pumps that are going in actually save customers money and are good for the grid at the same time. So just the important part here is you can pay for grid values, and you can also overlay other benefits like what we call market transformation or market support, which is we want heat pumps and things like equity. We want to help low-income customers. Those are not market-based from the standpoint that they're not cheap, but they are a good policy goal, but we have to pay for them. It's not going to be competitive with the natural gas power plant. You have to be willing to front the money. So behind all this is what we call revenue grade M&V, which means this can't be a black box. This needs to be standardized, consistent methods and implementation so that everybody gets the same answer, and that answer is valid. And it's like the kilowatt hour or bushel of corn. We can't have multiple definitions. We should be standardizing on open source and collaborating on an agreement on how we measure and create baselines that can be consistent across the US and the EU, Australia, other parts of the world. There's no reason that the EU needs a different kilowatt hour, megawatt hour than the US. The math is the math. Buildings are buildings. They operate the same way. So we'd highly encourage collaboration. We see a lot of fragmentation where everybody feels like the first thing they should do is come up with a new method. That's the exact opposite of what we should be doing. We should be collaborating on the best possible, consistent, reproducible methods on all sides of the pond. These are open source, which means they can be used for any purpose. All of the data science and mathematics and process that went into creating the methods and the code are available. We're actually starting a new CalTrack process, in particular to include solar irradiance, which will be starting up in the next few months. So these tools are totally available. I'll get into them a little bit more, but the CalTrack OpenE meter is a time-of-week temperature model that uses past performance to create an hourly model that can forecast usage in buildings, and also by doing that, baseline them. Grid meter is an automated system to create comparison groups of non-participants to normalize for things, and I'll touch on this, like COVID. Without it, the measurement's not valid. Especially things now with like Ukrainian oil gas shock, for example. You can't just use past performance as a measure of future results. You will get the wrong answer much of the time. And then Flex Value is a tool that converts kilowatt savings into money. And also calculates things like cost effectiveness so that you can pay based on what is a cost effective payment for the resource you're acquiring. And then energy differential privacy is something in the EU you should absolutely be looking at, which is a very robust mathematical approach to utilizing population data and protecting individual customer privacy. Differential privacy is a really advanced technique where you can mathematically protect individual customers' privacy levels, and you still utilize population data sets in the process. Really important. We cannot do this unless we can unlock smart meter data. In fact, all behind the meter stuff is essentially a big black box unless we can utilize the telemetry that we've spent billions implementing, and you have as well in Europe. And energy differential privacy is a means to do that. So the way that we do the measurement is a little bit more, I was going to say more advanced, different. The first step we do is we look at treated customers individually, and we look at their past performance. We can do this over, this is looking at a year. Actually, this is an event-driven approach. Again, we don't differentiate between EE and DR. If we're looking at energy efficiency, we're using the last 12 months to predict going forward. We're creating models for energy use for each hour of each month of the year based on temperature and occupancy patterns for each customer. And so this is a roll-up of that where we've looked at each customer and we've predicted the baseline for each customer, and then you can see the event-driven actual performance at that site level for each of them. Then we use some grid meter with differential privacy, and for each customer that's been treated, we identify customers that were untreated that have very much the same energy usage pattern in the same NACE code and location as the treated customers. And this is where we're tracking things like COVID, or how folks respond to changes in gas prices, or extreme heat events that might not be in our trading data set. Or in California, we have flex alerts on the radio that are affecting behavior. And how do we pull those things out of the calculation so that we're not paying for exogenous stuff? And that's critical, especially things like Omicron and other things happening where Residential all looks, for example, like it's not saving energy, and in many cases, if you just look at commercial buildings, it looks like they're saving a lot of energy, and really they're just closed. And we can measure straight through that, but you have to move past just a site level measurement to do that and get what we talk about as the difference in differences. So again, this is an example of another DR measurement during a 3-hour window. And again, the difference between EE and DR, EE uses the last 12 months, DR uses the last 60 days to re-baseline in the performance period of an event, and picking out any event response in that 60-day period. But you can see the predicted baseline for this customer set versus what they actually did, and this is their event response. Again, we can do DR with the California Independent Systems Operator in the U and virtual power plants with the utility, and we can do so in a way that doesn't double count them. And in fact, we have to, because we want this behavior and we need the value that's created. The other thing that's possible is to, again, do EE and DR in such a way that it works together. So we will forecast long-term changes from, say, a thermostat. We can measure how that affects demand every day of the year. And then when there's an event, we will re-baseline those buildings that have a thermostat and be able to separate what was a long-term predictable response to that forecasted capacity, that long-term avoided cost value, and what is a response to that event signal, and pay for those accordingly. Because events are much more valuable. If you respond to an emergency coming from the systems operator, that's worth a lot more, but there's not much of it. So we need to actually be able to get paid for both without double counting, which we're totally able to do at this point. And you need that for, one, the grid, you need it to respond this way, but also the economics. If you want to make this attractive to the market, you need to be able to get paid for all of its attributes. So just touching on this real quick, COVID, again, this is where we really need to think a little differently about our methods. Just looking at a customer's past performance as a baseline with things like COVID isn't really valid. In many cases, all you're measuring is things like COVID, as opposed to the actual change in demand. And I would, again, really encourage that as we think methodologically, like not recreating the wheel. Linux Foundation is actually bigger in the EU than the US. These are parked in the Linux Foundation, open methods and process. We should be collaborating and measuring in a consistent way. We're trying to get away from the bespoke nature of M&V, where every engineer uses different code and gets different answers. And that's really fundamental to transacting in a market. You have to have a consistent product. You can't have a different answer every one you ask. So frankly, it was a little disappointing that, one of the first things that happened was trying to recreate Caltrack instead of improving it, which to us, even if it's better, is a setback, because now we have multiple definitions of the same thing. And we're not having an accuracy problem, by the way. That's not the problem we're having in the market. So this is an example of commercial buildings during COVID. Smash, gone, savings are gone. But what this looks like is actually savings. Like this is what you'll see. Is this will manifest in traditional M&V as savings. And you can either go one of two ways. You can have an engineer set up a tent in the lobby and try to count the number of people going in and out of a building and adjust for it. We think that's actually not possible. Or we go the other way and we use comparison groups at a portfolio level, which doesn't really work for individual sites. Comparison groups are great for populations, but don't apply to individuals. And this is what we found. Really significant changes by sector and a ton of distribution within each sector as well. And so you need a pretty sophisticated approach to deal with this. For example, again, it really matters. Are you dealing with schools or banks? And then within that, are you dealing with a bank that was open or closed? If you don't have a very sophisticated way to adjust for this, your first, looks like savings, but really it's closed. And second, within the same sector, the corner grocery store is closed, but Safeway's open. You've got to be much more precise, or you end up just measuring this stuff. The good news is we can. So the grid meter open source comparison group stuff, which is published, it was created by the Department of Energy with us, open source, and it matches individual customers to the treated population. So this is an example of customers through the COVID change. So this is right through COVID, and you can see red is the population, purple is the treated group, and orange is pulling out a comparison group that mimics the usage patterns right through COVID of the treated group, right? And so now we can separate what is energy efficiency, what is COVID, and we can measure right through it, which is terribly critical. And it's not just COVID. For example, there's another exogenous event. I don't know what it did in Europe. Doing something is that, and if you don't compensate for it, you're going to pay for it, or maybe not pay for it. So we got to be able to deal with it, or that kind of base measurement is going to work. So I'll go ahead and hand the reins back. Appreciate everybody's time. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Matt, very much. to the attendees. Because Matt, I understand that you need to be leaving soon. If someone has any questions, I think we can address one or two right now.
I just wanted to apologize, Brad, broadly. We have everyone's well, but we have COVID in our house, so I have to take kids to school this morning, which I was not expecting. It's early in California.
Perhaps a question I have is, because we see little traction at the moment in the EU with convincing system operators. I wonder what was it in the US that allowed all this to happen in the first place? Because you started at least a decade earlier.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's a few things. One is those impacts I was showing are terribly expensive and they need all the resources they can get, right? Like there's not enough new generation or storage to solve these grid problems. So, crisis leads to opportunity. We also didn't start just with pay for performance. We started by taking these methods that we had developed and utilizing them to first analyze past performance of programs to get people and use that measurement as the basis for pay for performance, both to convince the grid operators this stuff is real, which they do not believe, and they're not crazy. Energy efficiency as we know it has been a big wild guess to date, very little actual measurement, but also to get the data necessary to convince the marketplace that their stuff really works and be able to have the data to actually forecast and underwrite it properly. So we kind of eased into it in that regard. And frankly, rather than focusing on kind of like the government to create the market, a lot of our focus has been on the aggregator community who's begging for access, right? Saying we need access. We're doing this work. We're impacting demand. If you want us to do it in such a way that helps the grid, you got to pay us for it because our job is to make money, right? So, and that's the real opportunity here is otherwise, energy service companies are going to optimize for bill reductions and getting replacing that crappy air conditioner, but they don't care about the grid. They have no reason to. So I think it's a confluence of things, but we generally don't start. It's rare that we come in and the first thing we do is say, what you need is pay for performance. We come in and say, hey, you did that thermostat program. Let's see how it worked. And we get the data. You find out it didn't work very well. But then what you really find out is a third of the time it worked great. A third of the time it worked terrible. A bunch of the time it was pretty neutral. And you realize, wow, we know who the third are that work great all day long. What if we just did this stuff on the third of the customers that did a great job? And you kind of build the thesis and people realize that current energy efficiency schemes don't do what we say they do and are leaving tremendous amount of opportunities on the table by not addressing early adopters, by focusing on measures and doing the same thing for every building and expecting the same outcomes. And you just don't get them. We have to, if we want this to be effective for the customer and the grid, you have to go to the places where what you're implementing is actually going to work. And that's not everybody on average. So I guess that's what I would encourage is let's collaborate on methods, but that's not the problem. And let's focus on, building a bridge between the folks who are going to benefit and the folks that can provide the solutions. And then, the government can come in and say, there's mandates, but it's like, they may say you have to do it or create the regular, but in most cases, they're free. Utilities are free to hedge their bet all day long, right? Like reducing demand during peak is a market hedge. There are, so it's not necessarily something they need to ask permission to do. Who's going to tell them not to turn the lights out? Whose job? What regulator's authority to tell them? You shouldn't tell your customers to turn off, to reduce or to increase their air conditioning temperature during peak. Is that it's the lack of market exposure that we're talking about.
Good point. Good. Thank you very much. Monica, Johan, do you have any questions perhaps, or in the meantime someone from the participants? Otherwise we can proceed with your presentation, Johan. Okay.
There's one question.
Yes. Nectarius is asking, will blockchain bring further standardization to energy efficiency and demand response?
It depends on what the problem is you're trying to solve. You can put anything you want on a blockchain. The question is, why do I believe you? And I can say that the number is not going to change, but why do I believe it in the first place is the bigger challenge. So actually we've dabbled in blockchain, but can't figure out for our use cases why it's superior to a database. The bigger challenge is again, I can put a number on blockchain and say this building saved 2 kilowatts last hour, but why do you believe that's real? The blockchain doesn't solve that problem. These also aren't fungible. So like if you change demand, the beneficiary is that utility over there, not the other one, because you're affecting their load shape. So they don't, it doesn't, there's a lot, everyone's trying to turn it into a token you can trade like a security, but it's not.
I think that provides a good answer. Good. So Matt, thank you very much for the presentation and the Q&A. And let's proceed to our next presentation. So our next.
I just want to say thanks everybody, and I apologize for rudely leaving early. The times have. This is a very 2022 problem. But I'll hand it back to you.
All good. Thank you very much. So the next presentation is from Johan Kullen. We will look into the work of SENSEI a bit more and the business models we're proposing. So Johan has more than 30 years of experience in energy management, comfort advice, sustainable buildings. He has been coordinating many energy-saving projects, both European research and national research and development projects in the field of energy efficiency. And he has developed the first Belgian EPC contract for public buildings. He has also developed Comfort Meter, which is an online comfort survey tool, and Plus, an innovative performance-based contract for energy efficiency projects. So with this intro, Johan, give the floor to you.
Hi. Good afternoon, all. Thank you, Philippos. And thank you, Matt. He's not there anymore, but it was really interesting presentation again and again. When I see it, it's really like, it reminds me the time 2008, 2009, when we started here in Belgium with energy performance contracting. And I think it looks like this P4P programs really are maybe the new wave here in Belgium or in Europe. I prepared indeed a presentation. I will focus in a slide on the difference that we observe between the EU and the US, and present a potential P4P model that could work in the European Union, which is quite different than the United States. What we see is that in the EU, currently the network issue is a little bit less important than in the US. It can change rapidly, that's the thing, but at this moment, and in general, the public infrastructure is most of the times a bit better than the US. That's also one of the reasons, but at this moment, there is not such a big demand. Typically also a difference between the US and the European Union, of course, is that in the EU, the government is really a very important player, and the US, they're really looking more quickly to the market to solve some issues. Then we come to the financing, and that's a bit technical. In both cases, you will have non-recourse financing. It means that, what does it mean? It means that if for some reason or another, an ESCO or a client doesn't pay his bill, you cannot go and say, hey, guys, I want your house or your building just to pay the bill. So it's a bit limited non-recourse financing. That's actually what it means. And then, of course, financiers, they try to avoid risks. So there are different systems, and the difference between the US and the EU is that in the US, again, they look to the market. They quickly try to package financing structures, contracts in one big contract, and then go to the market and sell there. Of course, we all know what happened in 2009. 2008, more or less, with the financial crisis. So what we see in Europe is actually not done, this way of working. In the US, it's still accepted, and it has, of course, also main advantages because you use the market to distribute and reduce the risks of financing. I think that so the financing in Europe is most of the times focused on project level, while in the US, they start with financing on project level, but then they put it on the market. Well, I will present in the following slides potential P4P model that we developed in the frame of the SENSEI project. And it's actually designed for the startup phase, because what we learned with the EPC, developing the EPC market in our little country, is that it's good to really make the first pilot projects, to really know it's a pilot project and to make them not too complicated. The principles of the model that I will present are first CO2 emission reduction, because that's what most public authorities want at this moment. And we think there is a potential for load reduction of electricity network. Matt explained it very well, I think, in a slideshow. As said already, we did some surveys with the system operators, and we didn't observe too many interest in this. So we don't discuss it further, but in fact, it should technically it can be integrated later on in the model that we developed. It's just a bit more complicated MNV, but highly automated as possible automatization is certainly possible, as Matt illustrated very well. And we will what is one of the core ideas of P4P is to bundle individual EE projects, energy efficiency projects, into one program with several advantages. I will explain that later on. And the bundling will be done by an aggregator, and this aggregator is standardized by the public authority. So it will be a private company. And this aggregator, again, in the pilot projects, will be paid in function of the tasks that we perform. So that's really a non-performance-based payment, which we think is needed in the first pilot projects, because otherwise the risk perceived by an aggregator will be too high and you will not get cost-efficient offers. And a part of its remuneration will be in function of the measured CO2 emission reduction. And that's pretty similar as the American model presently. And what does this aggregator has to do? He has to, and that's a very difficult one actually, to get the projects to convince potential actors in the market to realize an energy efficiency project. That's really a difficult one, as we know from the startup of the energy performance contracting markets in Belgium. So really you have to develop a good approach, and there you need a specialized player in the market, in this case an aggregator. Of course, he will also channel the financing and do the paperwork. What is the scheme that we were thinking of? Maybe just to get the big lines, and the green ones are the public entities, and the blue ones are private entities. And as we know, if there is a money flow, say from the public authority or from the government to the private company, there has to be always a sort of procurement. So we have the public authority that is in our example tendering the aggregators. And then, of course, there's also the system operator that should be involved. That's also what we learned in the SENSEI project in this whole process. And in this case, doesn't do the tendering. It's always good in contracting that you have one tendering authority. Okay, then we tender the aggregator, and he can then look for ESCOs or do it himself, that at the end look for economic agents in the market to do the CO2 emission reduction projects. You have all kinds of flows. As you can see, there is the subsidy flow. Wait a minute, yes. The gray arrow, that's actually a subsidy CO2 emission reduction that goes from the public authority to the aggregator, and he gives it to ESCOs, and this ESCO uses it in their contract to seduce economic agents to realize the wanted CO2 emission reductions and to pay also the investments. There is also the financing. One of the things about energy performance contracting, but I have also the impression of P4P models is that people think immediately of the importance of financing. And what is our experience in performance-based approaches like energy performance contracting, but also P4P, that is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that you bundle energy saving activities and that you have performance-based contracting approach. But still, there is a lot of opportunity for using the enormous financial resources that are available in the financial market to channel to the aggregators, and that, as explained, can channel it to the market. And therefore, we think it's a good strategy to set up a public fund that takes care of the tendering of private third-party finances. That can be banks, pension funds, and then he goes to the market. He does this tendering or competition procedure on the financial market every, say, two, 3 years, because that's what we learned also, that it changes pretty fast. So they will not engage for interest rate for 5 years, for instance, as you can understand, the changing situation at this moment. And then the fund offers this financing possibility to the aggregators that again goes with it to the market. So it's actually a sort of bank, you can say, and this bank offers funding. We think it's good to tender several separate EE programs. In this model, we have for each EE program one aggregator, and an aggregator will be responsible for the realization of P4P program, actually in one sector, in one geographic area, and in one, and he has one CO2 emission reduction target that's fixed by the government for this sector. And he will award it, of course, as this is typically for procurement procedure, in function, of course, of the price, say the program cost, and the quality of the program, the task that he will implement. So it's a mixture again of really performance-based, that's the price of the CO2 emission reduction, and the tasks that he has to perform. And of course, he has to, once he has awarded, he has to execute the program, he has to do minimal share of tasks. So, and he has to also realize a sort of CO2 reduction target, for instance, 100,000 ton CO2 reduction, and there will be a rather small bonus of miles in function of if he really realized the target or not. That's pretty similar compared with an energy performance contract, where you also have a guaranteed energy saving. That's a bit of similarity, but there would the bonus miles will be rather small. And I give you an example. For instance, if he only realizes CO2 emission reduction of 80,000 ton, he will pay a fee of penalty of 200,000 euro. So he is, the aggregator will be motivated to realize the CO2 emission reduction target fixed by the government, but if he doesn't succeed, the price is not too high. Certainly in the first pilot projects, we think it's advisable to work on that way, just to reduce the risk fee and also the increase the cost efficiency of the program. The aggregator will get the money and via, again, the realization of tasks. So that's a pretty, if he just does what he promised in his project, he will get roughly already the half of the money, which will reduce the perceived risk. And then for the rest, that will be an important incentive to really make sure that the tasks that he performed really reduce as much CO2 as possible. And as an example, suppose he will get for his tasks to perform at 3 million euro. If they're all done, so that's really checking, did he do this, did he do this, did he perform certain investments? And then there is the measured CO2 emission reduction remuneration, in this case, for instance, 80,000 ton. And that multiplied with 30 euro a ton. In his case, that would generate a remuneration of 2.4 million euro. I think I passed already the 30 minutes, so Sitzel, can I proceed, or what do you think? Yes, I can. No. Okay, there are some methodological challenges. What happens if the energy price increases very much? There has to be a sort of, in that case, it will be easier to realize a sort of CO2 emission reduction. And what I understood from the US example, the way how they work is that they compare it with, in the same sector, with other companies where there was no energy saving action. So that's one possibility. Another possibility would be that there would be a sort of function and correction function of the price of electricity and natural gas. Of course, also the investment costs can change. This is pretty important. At this moment, I think in Belgium, investment costs are increased since 2021 with 40%, roughly. So that's important. That impacts, of course, also the costs for CO2 emission reduction. And then you have, of course, the business cycle. If there is an economic crisis, the chances that economic actors will invest, and then actually will invest in CO2 emission reduction decreases. Okay, and that's, I think, the last slide are the fund. So remember, there was this fund, and the aggregator receives funding from the fund. What we know for EPC projects, but also what we also learned via the surveys of the SENSEI project, that the interest rate of given by the fund is determined, of course, by the financial institutions that are tendered by the fund, as you might remember, that are private institutions. So there is a risk profile that is perceived by the financial sector. There is, of course, a market interest reference rate, the rate of the European Central Bank, for instance, is an important one in Europe. And there is a percentage risk taken by the public authority. For instance, the public authority could say, well, if an aggregator goes bankrupt, I take 10% of the first failure of repayment of a sort of investment, I will pay it, I will cover it, and you only will have to intervene for the other 90%, which is a big difference than if they would have to pay everything. And as explained, the fund receives funding of the tendered third-party investors, and we expect a low interest rate just because there is a lot of interest of private investors in the market to fund this kind of projects. And of course, you have advantages of scale also. And again, like explained, the public authority could take part of the funding risks. So I think with this and with the girls, they have some questions, but maybe you too, and I'm open for it all. I'll leave it to the quizmaster, Sitzel, what is the procedure for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johan. Would someone from the audience have any questions based on what has just been presented? You can raise your hand. You can also type in the questions directly in the chat. Let's give this a few seconds. And if no questions are present, I guess, Monica, you could also.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, we still have 25 minutes, so I guess this gives you enough time for the presentation. So everyone, I would like to present to you Monica Pascual, who is an energy engineer and works for the General Directorate of Territory and Urbanism at the Generalitat de Catalunya, so that's the local government of Catalonia, Spain. She's also very experienced in energy efficiency consulting and energy auditing in the commercial and industrial sectors. So with this introduction, Monica, I give the floor to you. And yes, we have until past.
Okay, thank you, Philippos, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone in the conference. The idea of my presentation is just to land or to use our European region or as a scenario, how we can adapt these all P4P concepts, all these specialization, these schemes that we are commented during this session into a specific or a specific scenario, specific case. That I'm going to talk about what are the motivation, what are more or less I'm going to speak about motivation that's in Catalonia, but I think it's common in the rest of European countries. Practical challenges, we see examples, or we are going to see what not examples, but what are we referring, what are our needs, and then the legislation barriers. Regarding the motivations, this is the 10 points or the 10 action points of the energy transition strategy in Catalonia. And I want to just highlight a few of them. The first one is the energy efficiency. This is the first one of the action points of our strategy. But I want to also to highlight the point 3, empowering the citizens, because during the SENSEI project, we focus also put the focus on the building owner, on this part of the society, not only the market, not only the commercial, but also in these properties or individuals, the residential sector that probably has a very important role during this transition. And also to when they could how they can participate in this new model of distributed generation that Matt commented, how we can make this balance between supply and demand. We need also these people, these citizens, these community energy communities. And why not to speak about the energy efficiency poverty? During this session, we comment about this rising energy price cost. So it's very important to not forget to improve our our buildings, not just because these prices are very high, but also to give the people comfort and a comfort. And another point that is very important for us, for a public institution, it's to the business opportunities and job creation. Generalitat de Catalunya is working in other projects, and we analyze and we detect that that is very important have or to have the people who is expert, because, for example, if we want to renovate buildings, we need these people, the workers, the professionals, very well prepared to be able to make these buildings with that works everywhere thing. Another motivation that we have from Catalonia is our climate change law, because it's the tool that we have, or the proven tool that we have that makes possible all these things that we are looking for, to how to reduce the demand, the energy demand. We need to take advantage of these local energy resources, because we want to be decarbonized by 2050. All these kind of things. And also important instrument, because during this session, we commented that it's very important to have these public funds, or in our disposal, to be able to invest on these actions. And for example, in this climate change law, we created the climate fund, that it is created in order to promote the increasement of the renewable energies and energy efficiency, to decarbonize the networks, and also to make make more efficiency homes, to provide the energy sustainable mobility, and all these kinds of things. Practical challenges. Okay, what we need to know, what is our state of the art. For example, here there are some figures, and we can see that it happens around all Europe, and Catalonia is not an exception. What is the reality? The reality is that we have a very old building stock. For example, the majority was constructed before 2000, and also we can see, because from Generalitat we also monitor the energy efficiency certificates, and we can see that there is a very room to improve. So that this is the point where we have to put our focus, and where we have to improve, or where we have to destinate our efforts also. Well, I'm just comment you the climate change law. I talk you about this energy efficiency strategy. For example, in Generalitat de Catalunya, we have also a specific strategy for public buildings that has to be efficiency by this year or by the next year. So we are making some different activities to complete them, to achieve the European goals. We also, for example, we are now tendering EPC contracts. A lot of public tenders are based in EPC models and GBP criteria. There is another, we don't have only the climate change fund, because the climate change fund is specifically for Catalonia, but at national level, we have the energy efficiency fund that I'm going to explain in the next slide what it is. Also, we have a specific model of these energy communities. This is an increasing number, and every time it's increasing the people who want to be involved in this kind of action. And also we are working in the new, how we can translate our strategy into a specific law. But what are the problems? During SENSEI, we see different, we talk internally and with external stakeholders, and we detect that there are different weakness points that that we have to overcome these barriers. One of these barriers is this limited initial budget, in particular for the buildings, this particular or individual building owners. Another point to be improved, or yes, that we have to improve, is this how the public sector can encourage the public can encourage the private sector to accelerate this energy transition. What the public sector has to think different tools, has to make the market more flexible for this private sector in order to attract this money to the market. There is also a reality that the escorts or the EPC models, at least in Catalonia, the number of contracts that are done are not at very few. So we have to improve these EPC models, and that's why P4P schemes can helps to make the EPC models more stronger, or can provide a guarantee for the ESCO to be able to do these projects. Another point that from the building owner's perspective, it's about the rights and obligation, because okay, if I am a building owner, I want to participate in this kind of programs. I talk with an aggregator talk with the ESCO, but what are my rights and what are my obligations? I will pay for just for a service. What we have to analyze these kind of things and give an answer for the building owner. And also, what is the problem from a public institution, from GenCat, for example? We need to know more, or we need to learn about these P4P models, how they work, what are their needs, what Johan explained an example, what we have to translate it into or we have to regulate it, and that's kind of things that also we have to learn. And the last 2 points, one is the database resources versus data protection, because we want to monitor all this data consumption. We want to monitor the compensation rates, but we need tools. Matt explained at the beginning a lot of different tools that could be useful to be able to play with this kind of database. And the last point is more related with the current grant, or the current grant regulation. For example, we know that okay, we have a program of energy efficiency program from a public institution that can provide you I don't know, a quantity of money, a specific amount of money to be able to install a new windows or a new heat pump. But what happens later? So this lack of evaluation and monitoring culture, we have also to improve, and I think it's very important to articulate it. Another obligation or another challenge to overcome is it's how the member states complete the directive of the energy efficiency. Now, for example, in Spain, this is the different. This is a picture of the system operators, the electrical system in Spain. We have not only the companies that generate the TCOs, the DCOs, and all of them has to provide to this national energy efficiency, a specific amount of money to be able to or to destinate to different building renovation grants, or to destinate another specific energy efficiency programs. And what are the actors? During this presentation, Philippus, I think, And Johan commented you what are our SENSEI actors, or what are the actors that we want to make part of the SENSEI. The market, it's not only it's not only formed by the individuals. We have also different kind of companies. This includes the commercial, industries, transportation, and also public sector in all different levels, national, regional, and local. And what is the question? The question is that we have to understand is not all of these different actors in the stakeholders in the market has the same motivations, has the same needs. Probably it's not the same a commercial that a multifamily building. So the public administration who designed the program, the P4P, or this future P4P program, has to determine what are these needs. And also, for example, Johan also commented the different specific geographically can also be important, because it's not the same a big city that a rural place. The different public institutions that also have a very important roles. For example, ICAEN and NIDAE are the energy agencies in Spain. ICAEN is the Catalan energy agency, and NIDAE is the Spanish or the national one. But if you want to, for example, if we want to investigate how to improve these monitoring tools, we want to how we can estimate, because at the end, P4P is based on the real energy savings. But so it's very important to work on this field and to work from the universities and research centers who can provide this capacity to have this specific and real saving calculated. And also another important role from between the market and between the public institutions are these sectorial clusters and business association. The system operator, as I commented in this slide before, has this role, and perhaps now we don't have this congestion that it occurs in the US, but in the future it's probably, because if we want to go to a decarbonized future, this congestion would be a reality. So it's important to consider how they can operate, or how they can be connected, or how are the relationships between the different roles. And the investment providers, here we can find different promoters, specialized investment, engineering, procurement, and construction. But at the end, the main important roles that we have to put the focus are the system operators, the market, and the service and management, where we can find the ESCOs. ANES is the Spanish Association of the ESCOs. And finally, this is again a new scheme, but all the schemes that we presented today are more or less based in the same idea. What we want to try is, okay, how we can translate it in case that we are going to a public authority that want to implement a P4P program. So this is we are going to tender to the aggregator. That can be the same program aggregator, or the portfolio manager could be the same. At the end, the difference is just to we consider the number of different projects that can afford an aggregator. For example, an aggregator could be a company, and a portfolio manager is this team, or this is engineer, or this is professional, that can are in charge of different projects. And the programs depend on these things like we commented before, depend on how we want to design the program or who are our the market we want to address. And also here, the third party investors, it's very important how, because at the end, as I commented also, the one of the weakness point or the difficult things is how can we afford this initial investment. So the third party has a very important role, not just for the aggregator, but also for in case that can be has a relationship with the building owners or the ESCO. Also with the building, this relation with the public fund and or the private sector. And what is in the here in the what is the information that we need from the users, or what is the information that we need of the suppliers? All this numeric data we need to know how what is the curve of all users, and how we can calculate or we can monitor not only the energy efficiency or this energy savings, but also the comfort, how the end user, what is the end user behavior. All this kind of thing can complement or give an add value to the program and to the projects, and at the same time complete the continuous improvement for in each moment. And the policymakers and the government has also the responsibility or are in charge to make the DCOs and TCOs to provide this information and to the end users and to the ESCOs or to the aggregators. And finally, well, the legislation barriers. Here I put, well, the example in Catalonia. We start from the European framework, not the different energy efficiency directive, the energy performance of building directive, the Green Deal, renovation wave, how these are translated or transposed into the national framework and into the Catalan framework. But one of the things that we can discuss or that it's important to highlight also are the how is now the energy, or specifically the electricity market regulator, how it should or must be in the future. We have to regulate it. Another important thing is the grants and the new grant, the current grants and subsidy legislation versus these new, more flexible schemes, such as the P4P models. And the idea is not to substitute or not to eliminate the grants, because grants works, but we can improve it, and we have to give them more flexibility. And P4P schemes are a good tool too. And also because as I commented before, the grants, we don't monitor enough the grants outcomes. So P4P schemes give us this opportunity. Also, we have the complexity, as Johan commented, to define a common model, or how we can define this aggregator into the current legislation, or what is how we can regulate this figure in the future. And well, this is a common problem, or probably we have to pay more attention or reinforce our awareness on implication for the global departments or the governments, and from the public and the private sector, and also to attract the interest of building owner, because in previous slides, we see that we have a very room to improve in this residential building stock, but we have to look for, or we have to design, or we have to imagine different tools and ideas to make the possibility to participant this building owner. And okay, for example, in Spain, we are also working to impulse the energy efficiency certificates as a complement of these energy efficiency funds, because this makes that this energy market participate into this energy transition. Another point is how we can regulate or the justification procedure for these P4P models, and what could be the different or the most appropriate scenarios. For example, we can see from one perspective, for example, the public administration as a program owner, where all the public administration regulates everything and start with a program, control the program, or just the possibility that the public administration just facilitated, give the guarantees for this risk necessary for the risk for this initial investment, etc. How can the public administration work as a one-stop shop? Why not? Could be necessary to create a public aggregator public register to give guarantees for the ESCOs or for the building owners. And well, and to finalize, and to improve the protocols between public entities and financial entities, this private financial entities or this third party, because if you want to make them participate in this kind of programs, we have to see what they can provide us or what we can provide them. That's all from my side. Many thanks for everyone. And if you have any questions or doubts.
Thank you very much, Monica. Let's open the floor to questions that people might have, either on this presentation or anything that was mentioned earlier. Either raise a hand or type questions in the chat if you have any. Monica, one that came to me while you were mentioning a few aspects earlier is what might happen with data sharing. So we might have, all the agreements in place, all the parties involved, but we might not have, good data accounting just because we're not allowed to share data for GDPR reasons and so on. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have encountered similar problems in other programs, or for example, in subsidies programs. Yeah, if you have any insight on that, how that might work, or what problems it might raise, or how it could be avoided, it would be useful.
No, because the fact is that we don't treat with real data. We just with aggregator data that it's summarized in a report that it's provided to the public administration who has to check it. But there is not a continuous monitoring, and we can check what is the real consume. Well, we know the real consume because we have this report to justify the grant. But it's just aggregated amount of consumption. We can see how they so yes, of course the data protection is included in the budgets of the grants, but as we don't specifically make any attention to this specific hourly data, for example, no, there is no specification by the moment, but it's possible that building owner or individual don't want to share, because they can think, okay, if I share my consumption, my hourly data, they can see what is my behavior during the day. If I enter to a house, if I put the heating, and probably these questions has to be answered to this building owner or the property, or if it's a multifamily. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, indeed, there's this hesitation. That's why I asked. Like, sometimes we can share our data over, what we do with our mobile phones, but not of our electricity consumption. There's a question from Elena that I read. Would anyone like to comment on the idea of using pay for performance as an alternative to deemed savings for demonstrating compliance in an energy efficiency obligation scheme? Monica, Johan, please also feel free to reply. My answer is that we should be using metered savings. We have the technological capability to do so, and it might turn out that one of our obligation schemes is not as effective as we thought, but at least we know we have much more accurate measurements, which is essential for the proper functioning of any program. As also Matt mentioned earlier, the fact that in energy efficiency work you can get paid irrespectively of the outcome you produce in terms of energy savings, it's a bit unique, and I think this would need to change. So definitely paying for performance, or at least employing accurate methods to measure savings, is a must-have for public programs, and including for energy efficiency obligations.
Yes, it's that it's it, but we need the. But I think the challenge is because, okay, what are going to monitor? We want to monitor all the consumption, and we know that, okay, if I just change the heat pump, I don't know if this innovation could affect absolutely in the whole of my energy consumption, because probably depending on we install, or depending our energy efficiency measures that we implement, we can see not an improvement, we can see how it increased because another consumption disturbed the final. So it's very important monitor the real consumption to calculate the real energy savings, but we have also to be more accurate and to know where and how we are making this saving. Because otherwise we were in the same situation, just putting more specifically calculations. But for me, the challenge is to know where exactly we produce this energy efficient this energy saving.
Yeah, very much agree. John?
Sorry, I can just confirm what Filipos and Monica said. Of course, we have projects not on a region level, but on the level of clients, and we see the difference between performance-based contracting, where you pay in function of the performance, and where you have other projects, building projects, where the contract is not paid in function of the performance and only is paid in function of investments. And in fact, the differences are huge. Actually, you cannot compare them. So I think definitely, I know, of course, there will be some challenges with M&V, but even they are solvable, as Matt and you too also demonstrated. And these little difficulties are really small compared with the difficulties that you have to try to realize some energy saving with input-driven projects, or deemed savings approaches. Really not so effective. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, I'd like to wrap up our event today. We went 10 minutes over our time limit, but well, I think that's okay. Thank you also to everyone that presented, of course, and to the attendees who devoted their time to learn more about pay for performance schemes. For those that asked, yes, the slides and actually the recording of this event will be available later on. So you will be notified through the list that we have from the subscriptions. Thank you very much for joining, and wishing everyone a good evening. Goodbye.
You too. Bye. Thank you.